So, Shaun Sharpe will be our first speaker who will discuss evaluating kochia burial findings from on farm trials. Shaun is a research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Saskatoon Research and Development Centre in Saskatoon. Good morning, Shaun, and welcome.
Morning, Matthew, and I want to thank you for the invite as well. I was quite relish these opportunities to chat with the growers and present some of this research. So really, really appreciate it. Just gonna share my screen here. Is it coming through okay?
Yeah,
Wonderful. All right. Just gonna bring up my timer here so I'm not going too long. So good morning, everybody. Again, I am Shaun Sharpe. I am a weed scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. Today, I want to talk to you about some research that we did between 2021 and 2023 here in Saskatchewan, kind of to the south of us and north of Regina. We did some on-farm field trials where we were evaluating different methods to physically control kochia. We were working with grower collaborators in this, where they would identify the sites where the kochia was infesting. Since we were going in early, we put the treatments in, and then come back to study the same treatments for 3 years. So this is a 3-year study, and it occurred on 6 sites. I did manage to get this published very recently, so I did want to share this with you. It's not typeset yet, but the information is all available online. So what I'm presenting today, this is all available through the Canadian Journal of Plant Science now, in their early access or early view format. So it'll look like how I had put it in for submission. But again, all the information is there. Um, so I just want to give a bit of history around the confirmation of herbicide-resistant kochia, and this is one of the major drivers why we want to evaluate physical controls, is because we are currently in a situation where the availability of effective modes of action is diminishing quickly. So in this table, this is a table I had borrowed from my colleague, Dr. Charles Geddes, who I'm sure is familiar with folks in Lethbridge. So here he's got the site of action. Just the pointer here. Right here, so we have the PS2 inhibitors, which we don't really use extensively in Canada, but if you think about atrazine in corn, that's kind of where it was used in the States. We also have the ALS inhibitors, or the group 2s, the oxymimics, or group 4s, EPSP synthase inhibitors, which is just glyphosate, and then the PPO inhibitors, which is the group 4. And we don't have a confirmation of the PS2 inhibitor resistance in Canada yet. I am doing a bit of screening, and Charles is as well, and we haven't really identified anything yet. So that's maybe the first bit of good news today, and what is can be challenging. Otherwise, if you look over time, the situation is increasing, and the time between the loss of herbicides is increasing, which would indicate to me that things are escalating. It's getting worse, particularly with the loss of PPO inhibitors or the group 14 herbicides. This is a really strong active that we use in a lot of different ways in production. So this loss is going to be quite hard to manage, because we were trying to use it to manage the group 9 resistance and the group 2 resistance. So yeah, so for those who haven't seen kochia up close and personal, this is me on the ground with my camera phone taking pictures of kochia early spring. This is what a typical mat of kochia will look like. You can see here we've got some old vegetation from last year, um, where the seed would have been deposited. And this is kind of an early tell if you are doing scouting about where it could be. Typically, it's a lot easier to see these remains than it is to see the little tiny kochia that's growing on the ground. But it does come up very, very dense, which is one of the problems of why it's competitive. But kochia is patchy, meaning it's not occurring throughout the whole field. It's going to be occurring either where tumbleweeds have deposited on the field margins, around sloughs, for examples, in compacted areas, or it may be traveling through the field in a straight line relatively where the tumbleweed has been blown and seed is deposited that way. For this research, we're primarily focused on where the kochia patch has established. So there's high density kochia, and likely we're not going to be able to grow much of a crop in there, particularly pulses. So this research is largely on the boundaries, but we are looking at if we can extend it into the cropping system. So with the kochia seed bank, the primary drive is to have the kochia static or declining in the amount of seed it is producing. So we want the seed bank to be declining over 3 years. And kochia seed has a very low viability. So if we can intensively manage it for a couple years, it should help with the remediation. Apologies there. So that's kind of the basic premise is we want to try to manage the kochia really intensively for a few years to try to get it under control. So in this study, we looked at 6 treatments, although one didn't really establish. So we had an area where we did nothing. So we had the kochia just growing as it would. We did a mowing treatment. It ended up being about once a month throughout the entire summer. We used AC Saltlander, which is a perennial grass that is often sown on the margins to keep the weeds at bay. So we want to evaluate if we could put that into the kochia patch and how it would do. Did not do well, did not establish. So I probably won't be talking about that very much going forward. I think if we had been able to drill and had a bit more moisture, it could have established better, but trying to seed it into a kochia batch during the drought, which is what we encountered here, did not do well. So I'm not really going to talk about that much more. We also did plastic mulch, which is a bit more common in horticultural settings, but I know weeds have a very hard time getting through plastic mulch, so I wanted to see if kochia could. And then we also evaluate 2 other types of mulch, a hydro mulch, which I'll call, cocoa mulch going forward. It's a type of hydro mulch. So there are different components that can be sprayed. It's usually used in erosion control, but I thought since there's already an industry, it could be something that could be used very quickly by the growers. And then a chaff treatment, where with the chaff, we use what was available in the field or in the neighboring field for that treatment, where we would just basically chop it down and then put it on top of the plants to try to bury it, or the plot, sorry. So in this study, it was a multidisciplinary study. So we, from my perspective, we were evaluating the weeds and the mulch layer to see how well the different types of mulches were able to persist in the prairie, as well as the effect on the kochia that was able to grow through them. We went out usually 4 to 5 times per season, every 3 to 4 weeks, count the kochia and do the mowing treatment. And then at the end of season, usually, sorry, it's on a timer, in October, we would go out and do soil sampling in the plots to evaluate the residual soil nutrients, as well as the microbiome and the potential for any allelochemicals. So with allelochemicals, these are compounds that the kochia has been shown to produce historically that affects how other plants are able to compete. So these are excreted typically through the roots, as well as in decaying vegetation in the kochia patches. Previous research has found 5 of them. And typically they have anti-plant compounds as well as anti-insect, and some of them also have anti-pathogen properties. And some of them, like the caffeic acid and the ferulic acid, also help with stress tolerance and drought tolerance in the kochia as well. And just as an example, with the insects, I've never really seen anything eating them or diseasing them. So if anybody does, please reach out because we would love to know about that. Just as an aside, so all of these compounds will stunt the crops that we're trying to grow in the kochia. So again, we had this experiment for 3 years at 6 sites. We were just working with the growers, so we kind of ended up where the kochia had established for them. And because kochia is highly variable, by the time we were able to get the treatments in place, there was times when it was starting to emerge. There was times when it was a little bigger. This was around a slough, so I think that was probably part of it with the moisture. And we had one site where they had done a burn down, so there was actually no kochia emerged there, but we were promised that there was kochia, and that promise was met. I also want to take a note here about the type of chaff we applied. We were in the grain production region, obviously, because it's major grain production here in Saskatchewan. So we did use wheat chaff quite a bit. It was typically um, the straw was not chopped up very much. In one site where the grower had actually done some pre-seed tillage because the kochia was very, very challenging to manage, we did use cattails there. I don't advocate cutting down whole sloughs to try to manage kochia, but we did want to try to use the biomass which was available. So again, I don't want to advocate the destruction of wetlands, is more so this was the biomass that was around and in abundance. 3 of the sites were quite compact, which we actually found out trying to take soil samples, whereas the other 3 were not compact. And they were in different places, so some were on the approach, some were along sloughs, and others were along margins. So this is the weather data, particularly the precipitation, and we have 2 sites here because the data from Duval is a little spotty here. We don't have any data from May or August for the precipitation and 23. So I did include the Last Mountain Sanctuary weather data because it was a bit more complete, even though it was a bit farther away from the centroid of those sites. And we were basically in drought for all 3 years, particularly for the 2 years into July here. You can see the amount of rain was quite low compared to um, the long-term normal, averaged over 20 years. So we were in very dry areas. This is where kochia likes to thrive. So the one thing I kind of noted in this study as well is that there was a lot of kochia immigration at the site, maybe more than I was anticipating. So there was a lot of tumbleweeds moving um, around. So for this project, we also had another objective where we wanted to go around and evaluate the chemicals in the soil at different kochia patches to see if they were changing depending on the biotypes and the areas. So we did visit some sites around our station, and then kind of there's 2 sites over here, and then most of them around our main study area in the arms there. All right, so now I'm going to get into results. So how these slides will go is I'll talk about the mulching effect first, then I'll talk about what happened with the kochia across 21, 22, and 23, and then I'll give some overviews on the entire timeline. So here we have mulch depth on the y-axis and the measurement timing on the x-axis. This year we were able to get it 4 times after establishment, so about mid-June, 2 times in July, and once in mid-August. And the chaff layer, as well as the coconut mulch that we used, was fairly static. We did have this little bit of a dip, but it did get back to the depth that it was at the start of the season, which is fairly promising. So this is about 6 centimeters. There were some previous research where they were evaluating how far in the soil profile to bury. So I was using that as a bit of a guide on how deep to bury the kochia in the chaff treatment. Whereas with the hydromulch treatment, we just did the application. I think it was at 2x rate for hydroseeding, just as a baseline. All right, so here's the kochia densities in the first season in 2021. So this goes up to about 600 plants per square meter, which is a decent kochia pressure. And again, we're in the patches, so we're not in the field. We're in the heart of the kochia patch while we're doing these studies. The black one is the untreated or non-treated bar, and then it goes cocoa mulch or the hydro mulch, the chaff treatment, and then the mowing. And again, I have dropped the black plastic mulch because it was completely effective. We were able to manage the kochia all the time. There was no kochia penetrating through, so they were just zeros. So there's not much to show on a graph there, but take my word that it did do very well. The AC Saltlander treatment did not establish, so to kind of make this less busy, I did not include it. Um, so that's why there's only 4 treatments here, even though there were 6 in the study. So in the first year, when we did nothing, the kochia kind of was at the same level as far as plant density over time. Sorry. Whereas the chaff treatment appeared to do the best and had the best persistence over time. We do see with my students, they counted in the mode, so that's why we have a large spike here in the mowing treatment in 21. This decline indicates to me that the plants were re-establishing or re-emerging through the growing cycle. Now, kochia has a a reputation for being early emerging, and typically it is, and that's what we see. But in these kochia patches, we did see reemergence even into July and August. So just a word of warning, it is early emerging, but if you're trying to manage a kochia patch, it can emerge throughout the growing season. So with the mowing, of course, it was very effective, but it did take extra trips out there to do it. Whereas with the chaff treatment, we just did the work kind of over here, and then it was able to help with the kochia across the different measurement timing. Now we're going to fast forward to 2022. This line here is the chaff depth for 2021. So this was where we started with the chaff. So over the winter, with the freeze thawing, of course, things settle. Our chaff layer had reduced. It's also very windy in this area. So some of the chaff layer may have also blown away. Whereas with the hydro mulch layer, it was still fairly static over the growing season. Things were getting fairly dry here. So I think that's why we get this dip down in both the chaff and the hydro mulch. But otherwise, throughout most of the growing season, it was still present and at the depth we were thinking it would be. Then with the kochia, 2022 was the worst year. I had my students down counting this, and it was a nightmare. The plants were at around 10,000 plants per square meter when we were doing nothing. That is incredibly dense kochia. So that picture I showed you earlier, it looked a lot like that. The plants were very dense and very small. And when they're at that stage, they're very hard to manage as well. So that's the kind of densities we were dealing with in 2022. The chaff treatment was still persisting, but if you compare this to 2021, this is about where the untreated was. We're around 500 plants per square meter. It's actually a little above that, but kind of down here in these ones. So it did keep the amount of kochia down. We were able to keep the density of the kochia down quite considerably. With the chaff treatment, the cocoa mulch treatment was starting to decline even last year and then into 2022, where we're not seeing that good reduction compared to the non-treated. It is helping, of course, but not to the same degree that we kind of see later into the growing season, especially in August, which is where I want to look at because I don't want the kochia going to seed, so I want to make sure it's not in there in August, right? So with the chaff treatment, it's still kind of doing the best here at keeping the kochia suppressed. Whereas with the mowing treatment, again, we are getting re-emergence, particularly in this heavy dense here, comparable to when we did nothing all year in the cocoa mulch. When we go forward into year 3, again, this is the chaff layer for 2021, so we are starting to see the chaff layer decline. I was hesitant to change this though, because I did want to see that 3-year investment up front and what happens down the road. So now it is still different from the cocoa mulch kind of early on, but as our layers decline by the end of the growing season of 2023, there is no difference. So these mulching layers are getting smaller. As I mentioned, there's a lot of tumbleweeds and a lot of wind moving in the area. We were having, I think, seed deposit on top of the chaff as well, which is why we started seeing some of the emergence that way, which I think could be remedied with a harrow. But in the small plots, it was a little more challenging. So the kochia in 2023 and then untreated was not quite at the same density, but we are getting 2,000 plants per square meter. That's still a ton of kochia to try to kill with anything, especially a herbicide. With the mulching and the mowing, it did do a good job at that early timing. This is early May, kind of when we would anticipate the highest flush of kochia from the last season. But really, it's the mowing treatment that is a breakout star in 2023 as we were able to drive these densities down with extra mowings. And of course, we had to go out at least once a month to do that. So as an overview, and including the plastic mulch this time, again, it was really good in 2021 to 2023. No kochia emerged through it. We did see some breakdown in the sun and the heat. So we did have to go out and do some patching or change it out. But the kochia was not able to get through. So that's at least promising if you're trying to deal with kochia around tree lines and things like that, that the burial can work there. The chaff treatment was very effective. I was very excited in the first 2 years of this that it did start to decline in 2023, but it was quite high at points during the growing season for its ability to keep the kochia suppressed. And again, I think if we can just kind of fluff up that chaff, if we're using a larger area with a harrow or some sort of intervention, then it can help get the efficacy back up again, because I think it is about that layering. The cocoa mulch, apologies, I had high hopes for. It was doing okay in year 1, but I think with the kochia kind of emerging through it year after year, the integrity started to decline and things were able to move through. It's also used in hydro seeding, so I'm not quite surprised by these results because other plants are able to emerge through. Um, and then with the mowing treatment, again, it was very good. We had very good efficacy. The problem is it's laborious. You need people to go out and do it. You need the equipment, and it's very hard to be selective with mowing unless you're doing like a crop topping. So you're mowing over the crop, but I don't think that's a really good option for kochia. So I want to touch on the soil just a little bit. The treatments didn't really have an effect on the soil chemistry that we saw. So I'm just going to show you some overviews on kind of what was happening in the kochia patch overall over time as we try to keep the kochia down in these patches. So we had nitrogen go down, not so much with the phosphorus. And there was a few others as well, like the potassium's not really going down. And then we did get some trends with the boron, but it was complicated and differed across different sites. But the two that I want to highlight are right here, the electrical conductivity and the CEC, or the cation exchange capacity. Particularly every year of the study, the EC was going down, which would indicate to me that the salinity in the patch is hopefully starting to go down. Kochia is a known halophyte, so it could be extracting those salts out of the soil, or it could be moving in other ways with the mulch. And then with the cation exchange capacity, we did see an increase in year 3. Sorry. Whereas all of these others, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, we didn't really see a lot of differences, particularly really strong differences in treatment, which is what we were hoping for, of course. So we had a student with one of my colleagues, Grace, and she did some fancy machine learning analysis using a random forest analysis where she compared the kochia density across all the sites, and if she was able to predict the density based on the parameters of the soil when we measured them later in the fall. So it's kind of, we took the density about midsummer and then compared it to the soil properties in the fall to see if there was any explanatory power. And the big 3 that kind of came out was the EC, the nitrate, and the sulfate. So those are the 3 variables that had the most importance at explaining the kochia density in each of the plots. Now, in the literature, there is some idea about resource pooling with kochia. And what this means is the plants are still potentially uptaking nutrients, but because they're completing their life cycle so frequently, the overall level of some of the nutrients is staying static, or it could be increasing. And then there is the case where they may not uptake certain nutrients as well. And we did kind of see bits of this in this study, potentially around the phosphorus, where its levels were not going down compared to the residual nitrogen that was in the field. And again, these were on the margins of the field, so they weren't in the cropped area where they were applying inputs. Then for the little chemicals, we didn't get a lot of detections in the plot study as well as in the survey until about 2023. So we weren't seeing a buildup of these compounds, which is good news because that's what I was worried about. I was worried that if we do manage to treat the kochia and get it under control, that when we try to grow crops, it would be these compounds would still be present in the soil, and that could it could help the kochia reestablish if it happened to tumble back in and the crops aren't going to be competitive. But my worries were for naught because we didn't really detect it building up in the soil at the end of season. So I think the interference by the kochia using these is very intimate with the crop plants. It's plant to plant more than a buildup in the compound or in the soil, which would make sense. Which means we need to be quite cognizant of management early season to try to avoid complications with these compounds. And then we did also, sorry, we also did a detection in the plants as well, and a couple timings, and we only found these two compounds consistently. We didn't see the other three, so we're going to do some more work, I think, in the future to evaluate why we didn't see the other three. If it's the biotypes and maybe our biotypes don't have them, or maybe they're differentially expressed depending on the amount of stress they're under or the timing of the season. There's a lot of things that could complicate that. So we're going to do some more work, but for now, the results are promising. And then for the microbiome, and again, I'm not a, a microbiome specialist, so I will refer to my notes here a little bit, but my colleague Jennifer Town did this analysis, and what we have here is the red is when we went into the crops where the kush was not, and we took a, a, a comparison sample, and we compared that to the soil in the kochia patch. And then with the microbiome, the red means it's microorganisms, bacteria or fungi that are more present in the crop field, whereas the blue show organisms that are more abundant in the kochia. So there are differences, and they have to do with primarily between the kochia and the crop fields and the specific functions that those bacteria have, as well as with the fungi, and then in particular, this one right here. Um, sorry, this one, it has been known to colonize the kochia itself in the stem, so that when the kochia is starting to break away and tumble, this fungus actually will help that. So it's a fungus that's found in the soil, but it's also found in the kochia, and it helps it with abscission at the stem at the soil surface. So I'm hoping there may be something we can do about that, maybe fungicides, we're not sure. But there is this association that we are seeing that the kochia does recruit fungi and other things to kind of help it establish in the area. So lastly, we did an economic analysis to look at the cost of trying to implement what we were doing in the small plots at more of a field scale so that we can have a better understanding of the barriers to adoption that a grower may face. So I did this through mechanization as much as I could. So when we could use a tractor to do something, we did. The only caveat there is the black plastic mulch. There are machines to lay black plastic mulch, but they're not super common here. So we did for this section is just by hand, whereas for the rest of them, we do incorporate gas for the tractor. So we have equipment, the materials, which is primarily the mulch in these three treatments, the amount of labor that I estimated, and then the gas, the number of trips in a season. So we did visit the mowing for the kush patches 4 times over 3 years, whereas the rest of these treatments were heavy, intensive at the first year, but then we didn't really do a lot to them for the years after. The size of the kochia patch I used based on the HR surveys that are done in the province. So my colleague Charles again estimated the average kochia patch in Saskatchewan is 30 hectares, which is quite concerning. So that was the level that we were trying to use to try to manage it. For the chaff and straw, I considered two ways, either with a chaff cart or if you were able to buy bales. I did some calculations to make sure the productivity of the straw in the area would be able to be done by a farmer, and it looked like it could be. So either getting a chaff cart and catching your chaff, or baling it and moving it, or buying it. Um, the, so the baling system, because of the price of the chaff cart, was actually one of the cheapest. And then with the mowing treatment, again, there was a lot of trips out. So that's the other thing to consider, is if you have important timelines in your production where you need the labor and you can't have people going out mowing, maybe baling it or using a chaff cart might be the better option. The mulches were very, very expensive. I kind of anticipated this. And again, these costs are largely from the small plots. So there is some savings that could happen by buying bulk. And then with the hydro mulch or the cocoa mulch, we did include an extra amount of gas in here. You'll notice it is quite high. And there's an amount of labor because you would have to buy equipment to be able to spray the hydro mulch. Then you would need a second tractor with a water supply in order to be able to spray out the mulch through the sprayer. So it ended up being two tractors moving through the field instead of one, which is why the costs were a little bit higher. And then the black plastic mulch, of course, high labor material cost, and or sorry, high material cost, high labor cost. And again, I don't think that's super practical to be doing across, a quarter section, trying to manage all that kochia. But where the black plastic mulch may be very effective is in areas where you don't want to go, and where you're not trying to crop. So if you have a tree line where the kochia is kind of infested in the trees, that could be an area there. All right, so that reaches the end there. I want to acknowledge the funders. We're the wheat growers here in Saskatchewan, and we did get funding through the province, through the ADF call. There's been a lot of students and collaborators on this project, and I want to gratefully acknowledge all of them, and I will wrap up there, Matthew.
Josh Lade resides in Saskatchewan with his family, farming with the Weed family at Osler. Josh will be presenting on the use of the Seed Terminator for effective weed management. Good morning, Josh, and welcome.
Thanks, Matthew. Thanks for inviting me along today. I'll just share my screen, hey?
Yep.
All right, can you see it there, my presentation?
Yeah, no, it's good.
Right on, I'll get into it. All right, well, yeah, good morning to you guys over there. It's still just got into afternoon here. So, yeah, I'll give you a bit of a perspective on managing herbicide resistance from the farm level. I actually grew up on Kangaroo Island in South Australia. As you can see there with my two young lads, we grew up surrounded by beaches, and I sometimes question that decision when I look out the window today. And found myself over here. After finishing university, I travelled across to Saskatchewan here and just wanted to see how you guys farm. And long story short, met a lovely Canadian girl and a few other things along the way, and managed to find a really unique farm that gave me an opportunity to, in a sense, buy in. They let me rent a couple of quarters early on, and continue my farming journey over here after more so growing up on a smaller sheep, cattle, seed potato operation on Kangaroo Island. So I just want to talk about really the notion of harvest weed seed control today. Basically, what harvest weed seed control does in a nutshell is interrupt those fittest weeds of the year, the weeds that are present at harvest, which any farmers on the line or any machinery operators or combine operators will know that there's always weeds present at harvest. There's some that have gotten through, everything we've done through the year, and those ones are sitting there ready to be put through the combine and hopefully end up in the grain tank and end up as dockage. That's best case scenario. But the reality is that a lot of them end up back on the ground, perfectly spread over the width of your cutter bar, ready to be next year's problem. So that's just where harvest weed seed control steps in. This is some pictures from our farm. So you've all seen this before, right? The weeds there sitting ready to roll straight in the machine and then get spread. And even things like wild oats, you know, generally wild oats get a bad rap when it comes to harvest weed seed control, just due to the fact that a lot of them shell their seeds. But I'm going to show you some research that Steve Shirtliff did many years ago, showing that harvest weed seed control is still quite beneficial for those sort of weeds. So here, this is a bit busy, this picture, but all it's really showing is just the part of the combine that the harvest weed seed control, in this case a Seed Terminator, takes control of. It's really just the chaff proportion. So just not the straw. You know, we couldn't spend all day milling the straw. We'd use thousands of horsepower. But the reality is that if a proper combine that's set up, 90+% of those weeds should be on the cleaning shoe and out of the rotor. So that's just what we're intercepting there, is just the chaff that's coming over the back of the top sieve, and putting it through a mill and just terminating those weeds. So what's the Seed Terminator? The Seed Terminator is, just a multi-stage hammer mill that just fits right in the back of the combine. You can see it between the two back wheels there. There's really not a lot to it. It just bolts in. A lot of these machines now are just taking some drive from usually the straw chopper drives and just taking some of that power away from that and just putting it through the mill. Here's a close-up picture of X9 combine with the Seed Terminator. Like I said, it's not that invasive. It just bolts on the hitch. And this one gets its drive from the chopper drive as well. And, you know, they use a bit of horsepower. As you can imagine, you're putting, 30, 40, 50 ton an hour of chaff through these machines and pulverize it to a powder. I always sort of work on, 80 to 100 horsepower, but because we run John Deeres, I guess you're all chuckling, but we're slowed down by grain loss anyway. So we're not I'm not too worried about horsepower in our situation. Maybe it is a bit of an issue in Australia because it's just so hot and dry and they can just power. They use a lot of power to put in crop through because they can, but we're slowed down generally by grain loss or just our tough conditions. It's another picture of it. It's on a Claas machine. There's fits for New Hollands as well and case machines, but just the big main lines at this stage. Yeah, so here's an illustration basically showing you the difference between putting chaff through a hammer mill or doing nothing. Here's some pictures from our farm. This is basically really just showing volunteer regrowth in a barley crop where we kind of push the hydro handle one evening, just trying to beat some rain. But you can see here that's without a Seed Terminator. That's with the Seed Terminator. Without. With. And it even showed up from space, actually. So this was just some field imagery. I can't make this stuff up. But in those early years, we only ran 2 machines with Terminators back in our 2018-19. And then from 20 onwards, we've been fully fitted. But yeah, you can see there, the orange is where a Seed Terminator was being, a combine that had a Seed Terminator on it. And, well, you can see for yourself, it's pretty obvious that it does something. I really want to just concentrate on this too a little bit, just the idea of stopping the spread of weeds. Back to that illustration of the combine on the top right. The reality is the combine is very good at spreading weeds. And honestly, a lot of it just comes down to the return cycle. Because you might have some weeds that go through the rotor or I guess most machines are all rotaries these days, but it's pretty instant. When you strike that crop, by the time you move into the crop there, you look out the back, there's straw coming out. So through the rotor, weeds are in and out pretty quick. So you're not moving that patch too much as far as the rotor is concerned. It's the return cycle. Like anyone that's been through kochia, especially on John Deere machines, you notice that you jam up that slip clutch and it's going crazy. But it takes, if you can slow down, you can watch that return bar slowly come down, and it might take 200 or 300 meters. That's because it's slowly going through back on the top sieve. Hopefully it falls through that sieve and through the second sieve, and in the grain tank, it's getting exported. But the reality is that some of those weeds are coming back onto the top sieve. They're bouncing along the chaff and getting spit out the back of the combine and being spread 50, 100, 200 meters from that original patch. And I think this is kind of critical because I like to talk a bit about spot spraying as well. And I just feel that, spot spraying, we're going to miss some weeds. Regular combine's going to spread those weeds. I'll talk a bit more about it. So yeah, we're just that notion of just stopping the spread of weeds. And here's this research by Steve Shirtliff. I love this stuff. So just imagine this being a quarter section and those green dots are the wild oat patches. You come through with regular combine. That's what he modeled after 4 or 5 years. Just spreading them everywhere. Put on some sort of, in his case, I think he was using a chaff cart, but whatever, just whatever you want to use for harvest weed seed control. It really slowed down the spread. And this is wild oats. Of all weeds, the ones that shell. It's a complete waste of time putting mills on for wild oats. Well, I can tell you firsthand, we've literally cut wild oat spraying from our farm. I should say we've cut the expensive wild oat chemicals, especially the ones that are required in cereal crops, because of this. We're just not spreading our patches anymore. We definitely go hard after wild oats in the broadleaf crops and pulse crops because it's cheap. Even though the chemistries, we've got some decent resistance to those chemistries, we've still got some good efficacy, but overlaid with good crop competition and all the rest of it, we've been able to pull some of those expensive herbicides from our farming operation. Gives you the full picture there. All right, so our stats, we've been running these things for 8 years, 100,000 acres on them. I reckon, 6,000 working hours for sure. And we've never taken them off. I'd say in those years, we have probably bypassed the mill, I don't know, maybe for 6 hours. So, yeah, and there was times where it's like, we've got to get going and we can't afford to be slowing down. There was some considerations we had early on, like how do we bypass? And that was a big conversation around it, but we just haven't had to. And I'm thankful we haven't. Some other things that we've kind of been able to do that's given me confidence in having harvest weed seed control as our backup is being able to, patch manage some of these expensive herbicides. So this is just an example of using some swap maps and putting, expensive granular edge in those high concentration kochia zones. And the thing I don't like about this, or what I don't like about spot spraying, is just the exponential increase cases of the half rate zones. So generally these half rate zones are happening from your sprayer or your chemical applicators on field edges or around bushes or fence lines, just that consistent area where that spray pattern is petering off, and you end up with a half rate zone, right? And we all know that herbicide resistance can develop from sublethal doses. So by doing this, we've created a lot of places for half rates, but having that Seed Terminator at the end of the year, as well as overlaying with lots of other chemicals and other management strategies, I just feel more comfortable about doing this. But, there's some fairly significant savings that can be done from this. Like, in this case, on 640 acres, we saved $35,000 just about, rather than blanket applying that edge, just put it where we needed. And we still, in this case, it was, I think peas were going out the next year. So we still did authority actually on the whole field, but we just doubled up that soil residual on those bad spots. And we feel confident doing that because we know we've got another backup catcher. Spot spraying as well. Like we run AgriFact with spot sprayer on it, and I think it's the best thing since sliced bread. But once again, we are increasing those areas for half rate zones. And to be honest with you, when it comes to spraying, we're not going to beat a blanket application. But even with blanket application, we've still got herbicide resistance. We've still got misses. So I don't believe that a spot sprayer, well, I know after using it for a few years, like our miss rate is higher, but our savings are huge. So putting that towards harvest weed seed control, we just feel more comfortable about doing that because we're saving some money on the chemical side, and I think it's just better for everyone involved, consumers, our perception as farmers. But then, yeah, overlaying that with the harvest weed seed control, which I believe should be on every acre because it's happening at its harvest time. It's not an additional pass. It's just part of the combine operation. Gives us a lot of confidence moving forward with this sort of technology. Here's just a little video just showing you just doing green on brown as a pre-harvest spray of dicot on peas, and it's pretty real what you can save with this sort of stuff and just putting chemical where you need it, which is what I really find most exciting about this technology, just using what we need. And I think it's good. I think that's what the population needs to see. That's what our city cousins need to see, that we're not just blanket applying herbicides everywhere. We are adopting technologies to just put them where we need them. But on the agronomic side, like I said, keep harping on about it, but I am worried about the increase of these half-rate zones and what that'll do. But overlaying that with some sort of back catcher, I think is critical. This stuff works. There's some pretty small weeds. It's in a full spray situation. It's knocking them all out. It's got its limitations. We could talk for another 2 hours about spot spray and certain things like sun angle and time of day and all this sort of stuff. But when it works, it works. So, yeah, that's where I kind of say, spot spraying and harvest weed seed control go hand in hand. We still have these weed escapes with blanket applications. So there's only going to be more of them, I believe, with spot spray, because you got shading and all the rest of it. We're going to save chemical with spot spraying, but are we going to increase those half-rate zones, and what's the implications of that? And just to kind of, this is actually a neighbour of ours who runs a Terminator. I stole his picture, but he sent me this. He finished harvesting his peas, and before he went into some other crop, because it wasn't quite ready, he went back and just mowed down his bad kochia patches. So this is one of those 30-hectare kochia patches that Shaun was talking about, pretty much. Reg loan once, kind of went back and reg loaned it again, so he get it through the combine, closed up the machine and sent it all through the mill. And this is something that we've been doing for at least 5 years now. Is we used to just think that we'd go back in these situations and hit these spots, but now we're, with chemicals that we do have that are available, that are registered at a pre-harvest timing with our spot spray. So we're not spraying the crop, we're just going to get in these green patches. And so just so we can go hit these at harvest time, because we just found that we just weren't necessarily going back, or the weather would turn bad. But yeah, this is actually me going back and taking out some kochia. But yeah, finding that doing it at harvest is better. If you can just get these patches, down to at least 2/3 of it's dry, you can push the rest through, because there's still a bit of green there, as you can see. And I know it works, because that's when it's too green, that's what your mill looks like, completely plugged full of kochia seed. So I know that the seeds are getting into the mill, found out the hard way. But that's the critical part about making sure that, the moisture, you at least dry it down enough, or there's enough dry material going through just so this doesn't happen. But this was good to see, much as it took about 2 hours to unplug it. It was good to see that the weed seeds were in there. And this is one of these spots, like I showed you that picture just before. This is pure kochia in a wheat crop, so it should have got going there. But after doing this for a number of years, this is what this used to look like. This wasn't a 30-hectare kochia patch, but at least 2 hectares. It was a full strip of a cedar right along the side of the road here. And after a number of years now, we've been able to get a crop established there. Just by, as Shaun said, if we can get those populations down, especially with the kochia, because it doesn't last long. But if we can get it down and not let them reseed or set seed, it can change things pretty quick. Yeah, and this is just some stuff that we're working with SWAT Cam stuff as well, Crop Pro. This is just basically illustrating it. Just think of those green and yellow patches on the left was kind of what our kochia looked like back in 2022. And then really making sure that we were drying them down and getting them through the combine, we've been able just to get rid of that seed. And I kind of you can see what chemicals I applied there. They're the only ones that really did anything. Like obviously glyphosate was being applied, but that does nothing except kind of make it grow faster. Yeah. Another situation, 2022 that was actually the same field that I did that edge in the low spots. Probably worked off that 22 map actually. Anyway, kind of same thing, at least it's not getting any worse. Another one here. Yeah, anyway, just getting to the cost of the chaff mill now. There's a lot of numbers going into here, but this is sort of paying for this unit over 3 years and having it like we're into year 8 with ours now, and they still look good. You replace some wear items, but these things you don't need to trade them every couple of years. You just keep moving on to the next machine as long as it can still fit. But anyway, just in the essence of time, I'm not going to go through all this, but I'm pretty aggressive on maintenance and I can be pretty true to this because we are at year 8, so I kind of know what we've done. This kind of gives you a perspective of what a mill, when they're running around 100, 120 grand on a combine, if you're roughly 2,000 acres per combine, probably $11 an acre, 3,000, 8, 3,500, 7, and I can't see a thing in the way here, but I'm going to guess the 4,000 at, I don't know, 6-ish, something like that. I can't see it. But yeah, it's not crazy when you look at some of these chemicals that I've got up in the top there. And you know what? Except for actual extreme, they're all soil applied chemistries, which they're not perfect. Like, I don't know whether I've got 80% efficacy out of any of those ones, and there's still 20% left, and yet we don't even hesitate to spend $27 on Edge or $20 on Fierce. Like it's just part of the play. And like that chemical drum here with the Seed Terminator written on it, if you could go and get 80% of your weeds, 50 to 80%, I say, with a Seed Terminator, depending on the weed, depending on the time. But if you could just get that drum and throw in your sprayer for $5 or $6 an acre or $7, you're going to do it all day. But that's what we need to remember with the Seed Terminator, is that it's not an additional pass. Like, it's just a tool on your combine, which you're doing anyway. You're going out there to get your income. This is just there as a backup and to help stop spreading weeds. I found it pretty cool. Went to Agritechnica this last year. It was kind of, eye-opening for sure. But walking through these halls just full of cool sprayers and all sorts of stuff, Big 160-foot floater that Horseshoe got out, more sprayers. And the people just smothered all over this sort of stuff. Tillage, like crazy over there. Yeah, the Seed Terminator was there too. Just this little diamond in the rough, it seemed like. Didn't get a lot of attention. There was people walking by, but the people that were smothered in these machines that are out there trying to spray the cure, which there isn't seen to be a cure yet, versus a tool that can kind of prevent the problem from existing in the first place. It just sort of was interesting to, go and see all that stuff and what people were all, really looking forward to look at and thought was cool, where this unit here is just, it's part of it's like the vaccine in a sense, it's there to prevent it from happening in the first place. So yeah, my key takeaways here is just, we just got to stop spreading weeds. The combines are very good at it, and we don't need to be doing it. There's tools, whether you run mills or chaff cuts or I just think we need to really stop spreading these weeds with the combine. The notion around in-crop sprays, like I said, we've been able to cut some of the more expensive ones. And actually, I went to a trip over to Western Australia one time and chatting to a couple of older farmers. I shouldn't say they're old, but vintage farmers that have been there for a long time and they've been doing this for many years. One of the big key takeaways I got from them is that there is often new chemistries that are coming to market, but we all know that when that new chemical comes along, it's very expensive. And what they found is that they were able just to hold off. They'd wait until it maybe hit the generics, and they would then use it but they didn't have to use it in those early years because they had no other option. So just bear that in mind too. You know, if we really keep our weed populations low, maybe we can hold off using these new modes of action. They're going to come. Like I know there is no other way. There's not going to be any more, but they're going to come, but they're going to wait until we got no other option and charge us a lot of money to use them. Yield penalty associated. You know, I've seen some decent yield drags from applying graminicides on cereal crops. You know, it's pretty obvious. It knocks them around pretty hard. MRLs. I mentioned it before, you know, harvest weed, seed control, and spot spraying. I just think go hand in hand, you know. You just need that back catch. I kind of got that funny looking picture there of that baseball player. I play cricket, so a bit different for me. But for you North Americans over here, like baseball, the big green thing's supposed to be a kochia plant. Got past the batter. So it's got past all the things we've done all year, whether it's the narrow row spacings or increasing setting rates, applying chemicals at the right times, whatever. But just having the meal as the back catcher, it's just that last stop. So we're not spreading those potentially, you know, super strong weeds that are resistant to what we've done all over the field being a problem next year. Yeah, and just think about, you know, let's talk about the prevention of weeds rather than looking at the cures. How can we do things, as Shaun talked about before, mowing you these patches or the mulching? Just look at ways to prevent rather than just waiting for another cure that we can spray. That seems easy, but we're losing them, unfortunately. And you know what? I even chucked in Chat GDP because we all chat GPT. So should we use harvest weed seed control? And it said, you know, it all depends on sort of the weeds that we're working with. But overall, you know, it's just another tool in the toolbox. And the big thing that I find with harvest weed seed control is it's not an art of the past. Like, it's just a tool that we're adding to our combine. And, you know, these machines you can bypass and you can put it on and off. And they're getting better at that and easier. So you don't have to use it all the time, but why not? You know, just use it as that last resort, and yeah, just stop spreading weeds. And Shaun, Matthew, that's all I've got for today. I hope that was in the time limit.
Awesome, thanks, Josh. Hopefully my audio is on this time around, but you never know. Great presentation. No, it was a great presentation by both of you here. So we'll get into the questions here. I saw somebody put one in the chat here. I'll take a look at this. For you, Josh, have you penciled out the increased fuel cost of using the Seed Terminator?
Yeah, I just work on. We were fortunate enough, actually, when we first got into them in those first couple of years, that we had two machines running them and two machines without. And over those years, it basically worked out to about 1 litre per acre more fuel. It's 0.2 of a gallon from our machine. So the machines we're using on average about 1.4 gallons per acre, and then the machines without were 1.2. So I factored that all into that sheet that I had there with the cost per acre that had my dollar an acre worth of fuel in there. But yeah, you might find in some situations it goes up a little higher with some heavier milling situations. But for us, it works out roundabout figures, $1 per acre in fuel.
Nice. Then too quick on the drawing, Matt. Oh, no, there you go. Okay. Oh, I see the answer to a few here. Well, I'll ask him again for you anyway, Shaun, then we'll answer them for everybody. So you mentioned that the AC Saltlander treatment did not really work due to environmental conditions. In your opinion, is the use of the AC Saltlander when environmental conditions are ideal for forage establishment, is this a good management practice?
Yeah, so yes, maybe not just AC Saltlander. I want to highlight that a perennial grass is what I would aim for, and it should be a perennial grass that grows well in your region, and it's going to grow in the area we're trying to seed it. It may be AC Saltlander, that's very salt tolerant, but there are other options. I'm not hitching my wagon to one particular type of grass. It's more we want to get a perennial margin established ahead of time. Just the same thing that Josh was saying. It's all about prevention, right? We want to take that area where that kochia is going to sit on the edge of the field and then grow and then tumble back in. We want to take that away. And a perennial grass is a good option because it's going to emerge early. There's a lot of biomass. It's going to use the resources in the soil, use the space, and then the kochia is not going to be able to keep up. Yeah.
And then for you, Josh, is the Seed Terminator as effective on small seeds like kochia as it is on larger seeds like wild oats, or do the small seeds make it through?
Yeah, it seems to be just as effective, based off the work that Brianne Tiedemann has done with basically one of the earlier meal types. I think they did it with palmy. It's 95% plus effective on those smaller seeds as it is on the wild oats. The bigger ones, that the critical thing is just getting them into the machine. That's the issue we have to worry about, is making sure we're getting to these fields before seed drop. That's the biggest issue.
Okay, and then for you, Shaun. Discovery Farms and Nutrient Egg Solutions have done similar trials using perennial forages and timely mowing. The results, after 4 to 5 years, the kochia was outcompeted by the forages. With livestock prices being very strong, these areas can be hayed or used to increase biodiversity. I've had some producers using a 5-year short-term perennial forage rotation to manage kochia, and in year 6, with an annual crop, we've seen the kochia come back. The seed is very persistent. With the kochia becoming herbicide resistant, can the seed also mutate to have a long dormancy period in the soil?
All right. It depends, I guess, is my standard scientific answer. Currently, kochia has been primarily exposed to foliar applied post-emergent herbicides. So the opportunity for that up until now has been minimal. But for wild oat and triolate resistance back in the 80s, they did identify that there was a change in the dormancy. Now, with wild oat, the dormancy situation is more complex. There are more genes to select against. So can that happen with kochia? Maybe. Will it happen with kochia? Probably. But what extent will it happen? I'm not sure. But if we are over reliant on pre-emerge herbicides, I think that's what's going to drive that idea of a change in dormancy, because what's going to happen is you put down your pre-emergence herbicides, and then any kochia that emerges while they're down is just going to die, and then the kochia that emerges later, which it still can do, those ones may have genes that would make it more dormant, and that's kind of how that would work, I think. But I think as long as we are using different modes of action, using different application patterns, and being very cognizant of our herbicide programs, I think we can help delay that, but we're not going to spray our way out of resistance. Like, that's not just how it works. So I think we just need to be cognizant that it could happen and be on the lookout in case it does. For the forage portion, I'll just say that I do collaborate on the Bridge to Landwater Sky here, which is one of the living labs in the province, and they are looking as well at forage conversion to manage kochia. And then I have a component in the SRI that was recently announced in Saskatchewan, where we're going to be looking at forage conversion in collaboration with Ducks Unlimited and the Red Bear Biosphere region in the northern reaches, where the kochia is starting to get established. So I'm hoping to have some more data on that as well. So I'm glad that there's others who are working on that, because I think that's a really good opportunity to kind of just take little bits out of production where the kochia is really bad, and then we don't need to spray them, do something else, and then use the sprays in the field. So
Good. I had a question for each. Oh, here it is. Oh, you got an answer. Okay. One clarification question on the cost. I think I saw your cost and savings as annual herbicide savings as $34K, but your annual cost of the weed terminator of about $40K. I'm expecting I missed something there, so I hope you can clarify.
Yeah, the cost that you saw there was just when we applied that patch managed edge. So I was on one 640 acre field. that we just did on the bad areas. So that was just the saving of edge compared to doing it in the whole field. Yeah, really no association with the Terminator. All I was getting at with the Terminator there is just having the confidence to do it, knowing that even if we had some misses, we had another effective tool coming on the combine. But like my math that I've done, which I don't like to share it too much because I don't want to be quizzed on it too much. But for me, with some savings on wild oat herbicides and a few other things along the way, and less yield penalty associated on some chemicals on crop, I work out almost a 2 to 1. Like for every $5 we're spending on our meal, we're making 10 for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then this is an interesting question. So, seen some research on plant extracts or weed teas to manage patches in other countries. They collect the weeds, soak it in water for a few weeks, and then apply it to the patches. As the thought process is the weeds are there to repair some aspects of the soil, kind of like forest succession over time. So, by applying the liquid extracts, you speed up the process and see the weed densities decrease faster. Any thoughts on this, or plans to potentially test this as well?
Yeah, so this was actually one of the first things I had thought about when I saw that kochia does have compounds that that will stunt itself as well as other plants. It's autotoxic for whatever reason. I don't know why that is. It's kind of a weird phenomenon where is the tumbleweed escaping that? Like, it's very confusing about how that works, but we didn't find the compounds that I thought we would find when we evaluated the tissue, so I was a little bit hesitant on moving forward with that right away, but it's still an area that I like to consider. But the issue that I've encountered, not just with this, but with other ideas about how to use the biomass that we have in the environment to then maybe collect it, scavenge it, and then pull that seed that's on the diaspores or the tumbleweeds out of the environment, is there's a lot of concern about domestication and growing kochia, and people don't want that, and I understand that. So it's kind of a weird line that we need to walk and try to figure out, like, how can we scavenge and pull the tumbleweeds out of the environment without also going down that domestication road and now have people planting it, because that's what nobody wants. So it's kind of a weird, and I know I'm kind of aside from the question, but the answer is yes, that is interesting, but it may be more complicated to do than anticipated.
Okay. And then I got two more questions. Both are for me. So first one, we'll go with Josh. So we Sean and I looked at before we jumped on here, but that Seed Terminator, is it readily available across Canada? Is it becoming more readily available? I remember when it first came out, there's only 4 or some that were being utilized here. So I just was interested to see if it's becoming more and more available for producers.
Yeah, it is. The uptake's been slow, so it's been hard to, really open up a bunch of dealers when it's taking a while for farmers to buy on. But yeah, absolutely. Please reach out to Seed Terminator. Anyone that's interested, get on their website and we'll try and make something happen. Obviously, there's the Redicop seed control unit as well that's around the place. So do your research, find the right one that fits your farm. But yeah, definitely, it's becoming more and more available for sure.
Yeah. I like it because it is when you look at managing weeds and stuff, like with everything in life, you really have to take an integrative approach. It's not one thing will fix or cure said thing. So I like the idea of the weed seed turner, and I liked your photo of the back catcher. That was a good one.
Yeah.
I enjoyed that. Okay, and then for you, Sean, a little bit away from the research that you did, but one of the things I've been interested in is, prior to agriculture in this area and whatnot, we used to have fires that used to roam across the land. And now, since we've taken that, we've got agriculture, we've got a lot of hamlets and cities and stuff, that's been utilized less and less, unless it's been by accident. Has anybody done any research on the use of fire to control kochia or invasive weeds in particular? Or
There's definitely been research. I originally looked at it, but with all the fire risks here, it was a little too risky in my position as a public servant. I also had weird dream about a tumbleweed on fire moving through the prairie, so I just wanted to push the brake a little bit there. But I think it's very feasible in like a spot application approach. Like if you had a hand torch and you had a very controlled system. I did my PhD down in Florida, so I saw some of the really fancy fire related machines that they had down there. That I'd be a little bit more nervous about. Maybe in a patch if you had a good area with a perennial grass or something. But yeah, that's still in the toolbox. I think it's going to be risky to use, but again, as we run out of tools, we have a harder look at these types of things. Yeah.
Yeah. I saw. I think it was in. Where did I see? I saw a video. They used a weed incinerator. I think they called it. It's just a AI system that just flashes heat off on the weed on organic farms down the state. That was kind of interesting. So, but yeah, I was just kind of curious because I know like in Saskatoon they got that Prairie Fire Exchange program. So I was just curious if anybody's done any work with them. But awesome. No, I think that's it for questions. So just want to say, holy man, it's a Monday. Extend my thanks to everyone who joined us today, and a special thank you to Shaun and Josh for their informative presentations and taking time out of their day to present to us here. So please join us again Monday, February 9th at 11 a.m. for our last session featuring presentations focused on nutrient analysis. Have a great rest of your day, everybody, and we'll see you next Monday.